Okay, you guys, swear to God, I finished my recording. I had just pulled some social media clips and I just got a notification on my phone and it says, Trump says he is pausing new tariffs for 90 days, except for ones on China, which are being raised to 125%. Anyways, so trade war with China, everything else, we got a 90-day pause. Later in this episode, you will hear me talk about the tariffs. So I do think it is important to add this little addendum at the top of the episode that is, in fact, not true anymore. They will not be going into effect. But this happens every time I record something and moments later, something changes exactly what I spoke about in an episode. So a lot of what I speak about is more of the implications, the kind of fallout, and the mess that occurred, but take it with a absolute grain of salt now because they have been delayed for 90 days, and after that 90 days is up, I wouldn't be surprised if they got delayed again and or never even went into effect. So, anyways, enjoy the episode. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. I'm recording this on about noon on Wednesday, a little bit earlier than usual, but that's mostly because Congress is not in session, so I really don't think there's going to be a lot of news on that front, which is where a lot of my stories come from. Ultimately, Trump is all caught up in the whole tariff thing, so I'm not thinking there's going to be much news between now and Monday, but if there is, it's not my problem because I recorded this on Wednesday. So spring has sprung and the weather is nice enough in Chicago, and I almost feel like that may be causing me a bit of optimism. But regardless, it's been a pretty wild couple of weeks, but it was not all bad news, which I'm really excited about. But overall, the news is giving very high highs and also very low lows. I also did pull the stories for this episode while I was drinking what can only be described as a heaping glass of white wine from Costco while rewatching Veep, so I really feel like I was in the headspace to get the best of both worlds. Also, I've never mentioned this specifically in an episode, but if you are listening and you have a background in anything foreign affairs, domestic policy, whatever it is, and you kind of fall in line with the things that I like to talk about, please shoot me an email to come on and be a guest. I'm always looking to schedule people, and who better than somebody who listens? Anyways, let's get into it. First up, we have the continuance of Signalgate. Now, we learned that members of the Trump administration weren't just casually chatting on Signal, they were running more than 20 group chats and using private Gmail accounts to discuss some potentially sensitive information. Topics of more Signal chats include Ukraine, China, Gaza, Middle East policy, Africa, and Europe, which was according to 4 people who have been personally added to such chats as reported by Politico. All 4 did say they saw instances of sensitive information being discussed. Now, we talked about why this was bad 2 weeks ago in my Signalgate episode, but what in the world are they doing? Signal is common in DC, yes, but I cannot say it enough. You cannot use it to discuss classified information. It is not unhackable. Encrypted, yes. Unhackable, no. This is actively insane behavior, and to go beyond Signal and go to Gmail, as far as I'm concerned, Mike Waltz and all of his little buddies are on their private Gmail accounts, like Mike Waltz 10 at gmail.com is sending you specified war plans, but whatever. This whole situation is infuriating, and I feel like the Gmail thing really fell to the wayside in all of this because it came out kind of in the middle of when Signalgate was coming to light, and I think that did it a disservice because ultimately using Gmail is much worse than using Signal, in my humble opinion, because while Signal is, not unhackable but encrypted, Gmail is not even encrypted. What are you doing, Mike Waltz? What are you doing? What are you doing? What is the protocol here? But they're communicating, and the fact that it's on Gmail and Signal and all of these channels that aren't their high side email inboxes is insane. This is actively putting you and me and our troops and everybody at risk. However, we're still in the same boat because nobody's doing anything about it. But within the Gmail account, the Washington Post reported that Waltz and his staff used their personal Gmail for government communications. Reportedly, he used the Gmail for highly technical conversations with colleagues at other government agencies involving sensitive military positions and powerful weapons systems related to ongoing conflict. Even if he was just using the Gmail for unclassified stuff like schedules and, what time he was getting on a plane or somebody else was getting on a plane. It's still a little bit questionable because information like that is still incredibly valuable to foreign intelligence services. So there really is no excuse for why he and other people, it wasn't just him, clearly, were using Gmail, like the email you pull up on your personal device, for these conversations. But where is the but her emails crowd? Because they spent all of 2016 gaslighting all of us, saying, oh, but they were in the closet at her apartment or whatever. These were on his Gmail account in his home. Additionally, Pam Bondi is now downplaying the entire thing, saying that there's no need for the DOJ to investigate. I'm sorry. We are talking about active government officials coordinating war plans off the record, as far as we know. This undermines, as I said in my Signalgate episode, not just security, but federal records laws, which exist for a reason, accountability. And if you think this is the first time they've used Signal, I have a Mar-a-Lago security clearance to sell you, because no, the F, it's not. They are using these day in and day out, and it's embarrassing. And also, now that it's in the news, you think that these accounts are not going to be targets? At the very least, I hope that once this news broke, that they immediately reverted back to using their high side inboxes, because now that it's in the public sphere that Mike Waltz and all his little counterparts are using Signal to talk about this stuff, they are target number one. Point blank, period. But also, related but a little unrelated, apparently Pete Hegseth is so codependent that he keeps bringing his wife to meetings with his foreign counterparts. I can't say for certain because I didn't do it, but I don't think she has a security clearance. Second of all, does she have nothing better she could be doing? Don't they have like 5 kids? That's like if your boyfriend, husband, girlfriend, wife, whatever, was CFO of a company, okay? And we don't know what the dynamic is, if she's asking to go or if he's asking her to go. But it's like your significant other saying, honey, why don't you come to the C-suite meeting with me? If anybody ever asked me that, I'd literally be like, no, that sounds so boring. Like, what value is she adding there? That's the least of our problems, but still a slight security concern. I guess we'll follow up on that. But anyways, on to my kind of highlight of the last couple weeks. Elon Musk lost big in Wisconsin. Susan Crawford, a liberal-leaning judge, beat out Brad Schimmel, his preferred candidate in the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. He spent roughly $25 million on the race. And then when he lost by, I'm pretty sure, double digits, I think it was around 10 points, he got on Twitter and was like, I knew it would end that way. I knew we were going to lose, but it was still worth the push. Elon, you're a loser. You are actually a loser. It's not like sore loserish, but it's like when you don't get something and you're like, well, I knew that was going to happen. Like, shut up. Like, you can admit that you had faults. It's okay. Anyways, good for Wisconsin. I'm still not sure what the broader and long-term implications for this is. I'm hoping that it means that people are telling Elon to back off, and also people saying that they don't agree with Trump's policies. I watched CNN, of course, sorry, outing myself, the night of the election, and they were interviewing voters on their way out of voting, and there were a couple that they spoke to. That there was one woman who had voted for Trump and had said, I'm not voting for Brad Schimmel because I don't want that extremism, whatever. Odd reasoning because you did vote for Donald Trump, but I digress. Somebody flipped their vote. And there were others that were saying that Elon is what got them out to vote, and in the negative sense, saying that they don't want this billionaire coming around and stomping all over their state. Also understandable. But, I'm sure there's also people in the reverse, that Elon Musk made them so proud to go vote for Brad Schimmel. But again, I'm not sure what this means in the long term. We don't really get a sense for what the public is feeling about Donald Trump's policies really until the midterms, which are still a very long year and a half away. Mark your calendars, November 2026. But it does make me feel a little bit good that things are moving in a different direction and people are saying, we don't like this. Also, in the good news category, Cory Booker went full filibuster, or really just a super long speech, and spoke on the Senate floor for 25 straight hours. Yes, 25. He notably beat the longest speech record, which was previously held by Strom Thurmond, who spoke for 24 hours in 1957 against the Civil Rights Act. So the black man beat out the racist, is what that should read, which is awesome. So it's super awesome for Cory to now hold that record over Strom Thurmond. He was speaking in protest of Trump, and his speech had an overall theme of calling out the bizarre stuff that Trump is doing. Topics included Social Security, morality, immigration rights, and authoritarianism. Some standout moments and quotes to me. This one I saw live and I teared up a little bit. He said, "If America hasn't broken your heart, then you don't love her enough." I think that was like, could just encapsulate everything over the last 2 months that I've been feeling. Would love to know who wrote that quote for him. Whoever his speechwriter is needs to stand up. Another one was, he said, "John Lewis wouldn't treat this moment like it was normal. Where does the Constitution live, on paper or in our hearts?" Another great one. Constitution is so much more than just a piece of paper, and I think he hit that right on the head. It, is a way of life and a way of living that we as Americans kind of have to internalize and take forth into the world and into our country to make it a better place. And then, again, quoting John Lewis to end his speech, he said, "Let's get in good trouble, my friend. Madam President, I yield the floor." And that was the end of his 25-hour marathon speech. Truly an incredible thing he did. It was performative, obviously. He wasn't actually filibustering anything, but he was calling attention to the lack of transparency and public accountability in recent legislation and orders being pushed through by the Trump administration. I think he did the right thing. It was a good speech. It's got some absolute bangers of quotes. He did what he could, and I appreciate him for that. And it was pretty well received by Democrats in Congress and outside of Congress. Republicans were making it really weird, and Tomi Lahren was like, "Everyone's acting like he went to war." Okay, Tomi, you stand up and speak for 25 hours. Go on. Do it. We're waiting. We're waiting, Tomi. But generally, it's pretty cool. I couldn't do it. Not that I'm the end-all be-all, but, it's still an incredible thing to have accomplished. And now we're back to the bad news cycle. Let's talk about Trump and his tariffs and the fallout, which we are still in the middle of. His new tariffs can be described by 3 words: a hot mess. Now, I'm not an economy expert. If you listened to my economy episode back in February, you would have learned that I struggled on every single economics class that I've ever taken. My boyfriend had to carry me through every single one of them. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. Okay? So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Okay? I'm not the authority on this. Because of that, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty numbers because it means nothing to me. Don't want to spew something at you guys that, ultimately I don't have a good grasp on myself. But we'll hit the highlights of, I guess, the kind of fallout that happened from this. So first of all, China, South Korea, and Japan have decided to team up in response to the tariffs, which, if you're unaware of the history there, that should not be happening. That should not be happening. Those 3 countries right next to each other, yes. Do they like each other? Are they friends? Absolutely not. Also, the stock market is tanking. Your parents' 401ks are probably in the toilet, and yours too, although I'm guessing most of you are in your 20s-ish, which means your 401ks aren't that much. And also, you have 40 years to recoup on what's going on right now. Your parents are not that lucky. My mom personally is approaching retirement age in the next few years, and she doesn't have the time to recoup the losses that are happening right now. But don't worry, actually. I should just tell my mom not to worry, because Trump says everything is fine. And we're, quote, staying the course. The course, apparently, is a cliff, and we are careening off of it, okay? The global economic fallout is already starting to show, and analysts are sounding the alarm about what is going up in cost. And also, there's only 3 times massive broad tariffs like this have been implemented: 1830, 1929, and this year, 2025. The previous 2 didn't end well. Think Great Depression and Hoovervilles. So I don't know if he thinks that he's the exception and these will be different. All I do know is that sweeping and broad tariffs are bad. I don't need to be good in economics to know that. And he also literally put a tariff on an island that only has penguins, no people. Because of that, though, some are speculating that they, meaning people in the White House, used ChatGPT or some other AI language model to do this, which is not surprising. They have economy experts that can do this for them, but an economy expert and anybody with a background in providing professional reports and things that are going out to the press would have done their due diligence to look up whether the McDonald Islands have people on them. I digress. On top of this, the equation that they used for calculating what the tariff rate should be literally boils down to trade deficit with a country over the country's exports to us, which is so laughable. And the White House, someone who worked in the White House tried to like dissuade that and was like, because somebody said it's just deficit over exports. And the guy was like, no, like this is the equation that we used. And it looked like, really complicated, lots of symbols, lots of Greek letters. But then when you read into it, you realize that like the numbers that they used was 4 times 1/4, which I'm not a math expert either, but I know that that's 1. 4 times 1/4 equals 1. So it ended up being trade deficit over country's exports times 1. The good news is that the Trump ride or dies are all over social media telling us that Trump is playing chess and that these tariffs will force the Fed to drop interest rates and therefore make the American dream affordable again. I saw that quote so many times, and then recently I saw a quote from a Trump aide that said some people seem to think Trump's playing chess when most of the time the staff are just trying to stop him from eating the pieces. Take that as you will. But also, I saw that quote about like, oh, he's playing chess, not checkers. It's going to drop the Fed rate. Da-da. I saw that over and over and over again. I keep hitting up on this like Republican side of TikTok. I don't know why, but anyways, I saw it over and over and over again. And I am so curious where, and like the same phrasing too. Like it was just copy paste the same all over the place. Who is giving them their marching orders? Are those just Russian bots? Like I just don't know. Somebody perform some research on that because TikTok's been funky ever since that ban was lifted. All I'm going to say is that I'm ready for a housing cash. I have saved my coins. I will not be caught lacking like I was when I was 9 in 2008. I'm ready to buy a property now. Moving on to some GOP corruption, general badness, is the fact that they are trying to steal a Supreme Court seat in North Carolina. A liberal judge won a state Supreme Court seat by just a few votes in November of 2024. The conservative candidate challenged it, of course, because that is now the playbook that everybody uses. And on April 4th, in a 2-1 court ruling, over 60,000 votes are now being forced to prove eligibility after the fact. Most of those voters are from heavily Democratic areas. This is such a plain grab that it makes me sick. If the court ruled it, so be it. But this is sad to essentially throw out 60,000 votes, especially because those are the same ballots that they voted for president and governor on. Like, will any findings affect those races? Are we also going to extract their votes from every other race that was run in that area? Because Democrats won basically all the way down the ballot except for president in North Carolina. So I'm keeping my eye on this because I'm not from North Carolina, but to throw out 60,000 votes in heavily Democratic areas because the Republican candidate said so is kind of crazy. I don't know. Moving internationally, Marine Le Pen was arrested. Yes, the far-right French politician, as well as 8 other MEPs and 12 assistants have been convicted. This was on charges of misuse of campaign funds and foreign financial ties. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and also, as part of that, she's unable to run for president in 2027 after being banned from office for 5 years. The French have decided that they will neither be effing around or finding out, which I commend. If only the United States had the courage. If only they had the courage. Far right of many governments are coming out and calling it political persecution. Give me a break. Putin came out in support. Of course he did, as did right-wing talking heads in the US and Donald Trump himself. Birds of a feather, people. They are flocking together, indeed. There are other people in Le Pen's party who could feasibly step up, so I'm not sure why they're whining. I'm not familiar with the French justice system, so unsure how this will play out in the long run, but do keep an eye on this because I haven't seen her say anything yet. That actually could be wrong. I feel like she has to have made a statement by now, but like, if you wanted to run for president so bad, maybe you shouldn't have committed crimes. Did you ever think about that? Probably not. Going back domestically, a DOJ attorney was suspended over a deportation case. This one's just straight up cruel on so many levels. The DOJ mistakenly deported a 29-year-old man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia from Maryland to El Salvador. You know, to that prison in El Salvador that's meant to house literal terrorists and is so cruel, and where Kristi Noem filmed a weird TikTok in it. That's a story for another day. But yes, deported someone who should not have been deported. They said, you know, it was the right decision. He's where he's supposed to be. Then they finally admitted that they made an oopsie, but then in the same breath said, we cannot get him back. So they essentially said, yes, we sent him to a terrorist prison when we shouldn't have, but sorry, he has to stay there because there's no way we can get him back. And that's just an odd defense to me because they haven't explained why Donald Trump can't just call the president of El Salvador and say, hey, we messed up big time. Can you go get this guy and send him on the next plane out? Like, I'm not understanding why that's a big deal. But anyways, Pam Bondi said that the judge cannot just order something like that. Yes, they can, Pam. It's literally their job. When the case came up in court, the DOJ attorney expressed frustration at the situation and kind of just said, like, he was frustrated with the way that this was being handled on the DOJ side. And instead of fixing the error, the administration suspended the attorney. On top of that, I think this was yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, the Supreme Court ruled that I think they just like extended the deadline, and the Trump administration was claiming it as a win. And I'm like, all this did was buy you an extra couple days. So haven't heard anything on that yet, but the fact that a man that should not have been deported, the government has admitted that, everybody in the public knows that. Also, this is the guy, I don't know how active you guys are on Twitter, but JD Vance got in a Twitter fight with one of the guys from Pod Save America, and JD Vance kept insisting that this guy was a gang member, you know, he's where he's supposed to be, whatever. And hours later, DOJ got in front of a judge and was like, actually, we made an oopsie. Our bad. JD Vance, like, actually needs to get it together. But the story is so scary. Like, this man should not be there. And the fact that he's there is problem number one. The fact that the administration is claiming that they can't get him back is problem number two. Because what in the world? Like, you are disappearing people, and I don't think this guy knows that there's such an uproar about his case. He's locked in a prison in El Salvador with a bunch of gang members. So that poor guy is sitting in an El Salvador prison, probably thinking, oh my God, what has my life become? You know, whatever. I hope he knows that, like, people are fighting for him, because this is actual insanity. He should not be there. I think 60 Minutes did a story, I think, on the deportation flights last weekend, I think, and they came out and said that they couldn't find criminal records for, how many do you think? 75% of the people sent could not find criminal records. This is not just bureaucratic failure. It's taking a step further and going into a human rights issue, because there's no due process, and the Republican kind of response has been, well, you don't get due process if you're illegal. Okay, so let me walk you through why standing on that pedestal is a problem. Okay, so a lot of times the response has been, well, what are you going to do if the police pick you up and they deport you? Oh, I'll just show I'm a citizen. Without due process, you can't do that. So the no due process is what the, like, quote unquote disappearing people is. That is what's happening when they're picking people up off the street and just sending them on the next flight out. What due process allows you to do is, if you or I were taken off the street and they said, you are here illegally, due process is what gives me the opportunity to go in front of a judge and pull out my birth certificate, pull out my passport, and say, no, I'm not. Here are these documents. That is what Abrego Garcia was not afforded. That is why he was shipped on a plane to El Salvador. He didn't get the due process that he was owed. He easily could have proven that he was here in the right capacity, and he didn't get that opportunity. So saying that illegal immigrants don't deserve due process is a problem, because when you get picked up or somebody who's legal gets picked up, they will not get the opportunity to show their evidence just because an ICE officer, a police officer, whoever it is saying you are illegal. If you don't see the problem with that, I fear you do not love the United States. Everybody deserves their day in court. That is what we are raised on. That is our founding. And to so quickly abandon that just because somebody is maybe illegal is wild. And to not see the implications. I mean, I think there was a little bit of a misunderstanding with what due process actually meant. But all it means is that you get your day in court. And the reason you get your day in court is to prove your case. If you are so insistent that you are here as a legal resident, you were born here, having due process allows you to prove that. Without proving that, they're just going to ship you on a plane to El Salvador, like they've been doing. I don't know. The whole due process thing has been insane to me, because there's just not this level of understanding. And even like when I was on Twitter and I was reading threads of people like, okay, well, illegal immigrants don't deserve due process, and you try to explain it to somebody, like they just keep saying, oh well, I'll show them that I'm here legally. You're missing the point, because that is what due process is. So I don't know. It does just seem to be a lack of understanding and a just incredible case of like stupidity, or like just not being, I don't know, because that seems so simple to me. I was not very aware what due process was and how it functioned, but like I can see how dangerous this is for American citizens. People are going to start disappearing off the streets and just told that they are illegal, and they're not going to get the opportunity to say otherwise. And that's scary. That is horrifying. That should make you shake in your boots. Anyways, on April 5th, thousands of people took to the street in mass protests against Trump's policies. From coast to coast, Americans are saying loud and clear, we're not okay with the authoritarianism creeping in the back door. Protests hit major cities as well as smaller, more purple and red parts. I know a suburb of Chicago had a pretty large amount of people in Arlington Heights, and the energy at all of these protests was very much not on our watch. However, one gripe a lot of people had was the lack of Gen Z appearance. Now, I did not go. I'm going to be honest. It was because I did not want to sit in Chicago traffic. I already do that 3 days a week to get into the office. And the highway's under construction here. You know, I'm making excuses, but I couldn't bring myself to do it for another day. However, I really wish I would have known about the ones in the suburbs. I don't live far from Arlington Heights, so it would have been really nice to go to that. And because of that, I know this is very much the pot calling the kettle black, but my fellow Gen Z people, we need to be out there. Our parents, our millennial friends, our Gen X bosses have done this fight before, and it is our turn to take it over, especially my elder Gen Zs who were politically conscious enough for Trump's first administration. You know how different this one is. There is another protest round coming on April 19th, so I'm hoping to get involved in one on that day. If anybody knows of any happening in the Chicago suburbs, please let me know, since I clearly missed the announcement for this last round. But overall, I'm proud of the turnout. It was incredible to see the videos and the creativity with the signs, and it makes me happy that there's a resistance effort again, because there's clearly been an issue with figuring out how to resist Trump, I guess, this time around. Like, there was such a backlash during his first term. I remember going to the Women's March. It was either the weekend before or the weekend after that he was inaugurated, and it was insane. And I don't know. I'm happy that there's this effort happening. Of course, Republicans have a lot to say about it. They're saying people were paid. They're saying, I saw one comment that was like, why aren't they at work? It's a Saturday. Most people, I'd say a decent proportion of people, do not work on Saturdays. But I digress. It's a way to cope for them. I don't think they could pull those same kind of crowds around something. I'd actually love a study on why mass scale protests in the United States are usually by the left. If somebody wants to hypothesize on that, I'd love to know, because what did they have, January 6th? They don't protest, even when they were all up in arms about Joe Biden's policies. Like, okay, take to the streets then. Take to the streets. They are open. They are there for you. They just don't do it. So I'm curious about that, about like why they don't protest, but then like shit on the left when they protest. I don't know. I think that's an interesting conversation to have. I wish I had a co-host to talk about it with. Going off of the protesting, Obama has finally spoken up, and he's urging colleges, law firms, the people that have been the most hit by Trump's kind of wrath, I guess, to resist his agenda and defend democratic institutions. It was not a speech, which I really appreciated. His words were kind of off the cuff, which I appreciated. It showed, a genuine Obama moment. He also kind of talked a little bit about the hypocrisy. I don't even remember this, but I do know in watching, old footage that Fox News was god awful to Obama. They started the birther conspiracy with the help of Donald Trump. But Obama said, "Imagine if I had done any of this. Imagine if I had pulled Fox News' credentials from the White House press corps. Imagine if I had said to law firms that were representing parties that were upset with policies my administration initiated that you will not be allowed into government buildings. We will punish you economically for dissenting from the Affordable Care Act or the Iran deal. We will ferret our students who protest against my policies. It's unimaginable that the same parties that are silent now would have tolerated behavior like that from me or a whole bunch of my predecessors." So true, Obama. Thank you for pointing that out. It's just insane, because what I think Republicans fail to realize is that if there is another election, I don't like to be optimistic, but I also don't like to be pessimistic. If and when a Democrat gets back into the White House, all Donald Trump has done has set the stage for the next Democrat that comes in to do the same exact thing. Now, I think Democrats are a lot like Joe Biden in the way that they care about the institutions. Joe Biden loved to say, "Oh, I can't do that. The institutions, the precedent." Donald Trump doesn't give a dang about precedent, and it shows. But if and when a Democrat gets back in office and they start to do the same stuff Donald Trump is doing, let us wait and see. Let us wait and see what the Republicans say about it then. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the last week in Congress. So Representative Anna Paulina Luna and Representative Brittany Peterson from Colorado have teamed up in order to allow mothers that have just given birth the opportunity to vote by proxy. So it essentially means that they can take virtually a maternity leave and ask somebody else to vote for them, which, in my opinion, seems fair. Corporate jobs give you some sort of maternity leave that doesn't happen in Congress, which, okay, fine. To ask somebody to vote by proxy I don't see the huge deal in it. I would assume they're not taking an actual like maternity leave. Like they'd be at home, but they're still, doing the work. They're just, you couldn't pay me enough as a new mother to get on a flight and fly back and forth to DC like 6 times. I don't know. In my opinion, it sounds reasonable. Brittany Peterson went viral for bringing her 1-month-old baby onto the House floor. Previously, Tammy Duckworth, the senator from Illinois, had done the same thing a few years ago when she had her baby. She even dressed the baby up in a suit because Senate rules say you cannot be on the Senate floor without wearing like something official. I don't know. Whatever. But this has been an ongoing problem, and it comes up every time a member has a new baby. Oh, to Anna Paulina Luna, a Republican from Florida, she's really nutty, but on this, I gotta agree with her. She had her baby about a year ago, and she's the one that kind of brought the idea up. And then Representative Brittany Peterson, who is a Democrat from Colorado, was signed on as a co-sponsor, and she just had her baby a month ago. And, it's tough. It's tough to be a mom and be in Congress. And essentially, Speaker Johnson tried to bury this and would not bring it to the House floor for a vote. So Brittany Peterson and Anna Paulina Luna gathered up the votes to kind of force it, and Speaker Johnson wouldn't bring it to the floor and then canceled the rest of the votes for the week and blamed it on them. Let us be clear, him stopping the votes for the rest of the week was just because he didn't want this measure to pass. He didn't want new mothers to be able to vote by proxy. Now, I'd be remiss to not talk about the hypocrisy. This is the party that loves babies, that loves families, loves family values, and they won't let new mothers vote from home, vote by proxy. So make that make sense. There were others saying, I think it was Tomi Lahren, she keeps coming up. She just always has the worst take. Tomi Lahren was like, well, if you don't want to go to work, then leave Congress. What? How is that a viable solution? All that is doing is reinforcing that, like, you can't be a working mother. So, whatever. But recently, Anna Paulina Luna finally reached a deal with Mike Johnson. She announced on Sunday that they had a deal to use vote pairing, which, according to CBS News, is an agreement between an absent member, so in this case, for what she's fighting for, it would be the mother who has just given birth, and a member who is physically present and plans to vote on the opposite side of the question, effectively canceling out the vote. The present member casts their vote, then withdraws it, and announces that they have paired with the absent member. The vote is not included in the vote total, but their positions are published in the congressional record. Luna wrote on Sunday, quote, "It will be open for the entire conference to use when unable to vote. Example, new parents, bereaved, emergencies, etc." I think this is a good compromise, in my humble opinion. I think it still accomplishes the essential things, but what I really wanted to speak about was just the pure kind of craziness that came out of this when Speaker Johnson came out and said, oh, we're canceling the votes for this week, and then pointed the finger at Representative Luna and Brittany Peterson. That was so wrong, and it put a target on their backs. There were so many people tweeting at Brittany Peterson, who has, like, I think her baby's like 3 months old now. He's still, like, young, fresh out of the womb, and she's been having to bring him to Congress. Like, she still has to breastfeed him. She still has to bond with him. Like, she is a new mother. So she's been bringing him to Washington, D.C. I think she brought him on a flight for the first time when he was like 11 days old, I think. Something insane like that. But it put a target on her back. And when she was in front of cameras speaking about how important this bill was, so many people, including Tomi Lahren, were commenting and being like, well, why don't you just leave Congress? Not to mention, Speaker Johnson was lying about it the whole time. They could have voted on it. He was just scared that the measure would actually pass. So I digress. And Anna Paulina Luna did have a point, for the party that is preaching about moms and babies and families and whatever, you're not supporting them in your own institution. But, ultimately I'm happy with the consensus, and I think this is a big step in the right direction, and maybe we can get paid leave for all. Fingers crossed, maybe in the next 50 years. Let's see. That is all I have for you guys this week. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Next week, we are going to be talking with Political Psych with Abby again, a first repeat guest, and we will be talking about collective narcissism. So be sure to check that out next week. In the meantime, keep asking questions, stay engaged, and don't forget to hate tweet Elon Musk today. I'll see you guys next week.